Mr. Gary. Let's cross over now to Youssef Al-Hailu, journalist and political commentator, who's joining us now from London. Mr. Al-Hailu, welcome to the program. Let's start off with your thoughts about the events that are taking place today.
Well, what we are experiencing right now across the occupied Palestinian territories, especially in Gaza, is unprecedented phase in the conflict against the Israeli occupation forces, against the Israeli occupation that has been going on for the past 70 years. Now, we are seeing chains of humans, chains of people along the Gaza fence protesting against the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948. The number is on the rise. Israeli occupation forces have threatened to open fire and kill Palestinians. It's called shoot to kill policy, as we have been experiencing this since the 30th of March, marking the land day. And it seems that the Palestinians are adamant to call for the right of return. What we are seeing now, people on the ground facing live ammunition, unarmed protesters marching towards the border to send a clear message that nothing will break their will. They will not give up the right of return. They have the right to live, go back into the ancestors, to the homes and towns of their ancestors who were forced to flee back in 1948. Gaza is known the world's largest open-air prison, unprecedented levels of poverty, unemployment, despair prevails amongst the population of nearly 2 million people. Half of them are young people below the age of 18. Two-thirds of Gaza population are descendants of refugees, and that's why we can analyze, and this is the reason why we are seeing these unarmed protesters risking their lives. Some say it's a massacre, some say it's genocidal atrocities perpetrated against the Palestinian people, but it's a mass killing against unarmed protesters. Some say that the Palestinians are putting themselves at risk despite the fact knowing that they will be gunned down. But at the end of the day, if you ask them why you are protesting, they say we have nothing to lose. More than 11 years of crippling, illegal, tight siege. Israel restricts the movement of people, restricts the imports and exports out of Gaza. Fishermen come under fire, farmers come under fire. The land border crossings, the airspace, territorial waters of Gaza have been under Israeli control, despite the fact claiming that the Israeli occupation forces left Gaza in 2005. So it's an ongoing popular uprising against the practices of the Israeli regime. It coincides with the relocation of the embassy. It's an insult. Actually, Palestinians say that the American administration chose to relocate their embassy to Jerusalem on this day just to cause even more pain and to bring the Palestinians to their knees and say, look, if you are against the United States, then we will not care about you. And we have been seeing that the peace talks have failed after nearly 25 years of talks between the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas and the Americans, the Israelis. What we are seeing now, if we need to analyze the silence and complicity of the international community, it's because of the clear and obvious normalization between Arab countries and the Israeli regime. So that's why the Palestinians now are squeezed to the corner. Either accept to consider your rights and accept the realities on the ground, or you will be isolated. So the Palestinians in Gaza has been isolated for the past 11 years. Even the Palestinians in the West Bank, who are also experiencing harsh measures against by the Israeli forces, 600 order blocks, the annexation of land, the building of the apartheid wall, arrest campaigns day and night. So all of these measures are aimed at bringing the Palestinians to their knees in order to force them to raise the white flag and accept the realities on the ground. But the Palestinians say it's our right, it's a legitimate right to fight the occupation, and we have nothing to lose. Give us our rights, at least recognize our right to exist on the remaining 20% of historic Palestine. So Palestinians, they don't believe in the so-called peace process. They are hopeless, especially in Gaza. I mean, there is no bright future. That's why you see most of the protesters are young people who have no future. The future is bleak in Gaza. And we are hearing just now Israeli occupation forces threatening to wage an all-out attack against Gaza by selecting some targets to cause panic if the protests continue. So in light of this silence on part of the international community, it seems the Palestinians will have to suffer, and we don't know how many more Palestinians have to risk their lives or how many more Palestinians have to be killed in order to shake the awakening or the conscience of the people. But the Palestinians, they say, we don't rely on Arab regimes. We don't rely on the so-called international community represented by the superpowers of the world, or the UN at least. We rely on the freedom-loving people of conscience, to mobilize and take action. And we are seeing demonstrations taking place across at capitals across the world to show solidarity with the Palestinians of Gaza. Let's hope this bloody day will end without more casualties.
And Mr. Al-Hailu, how has an insufficient Arab response contributed to what we're seeing right now?
It plays a major role. Obviously, if there is an intervention on part of the Arab regimes, we will see at least some pressure mounting on the Israeli side. So, I mean, the Arab regimes are blamed by the vast majority of the Palestinians, especially neighboring Egypt that has diplomatic ties with the Israeli regime, Jordan, as well as Saudi Arabia. So Palestinians are dismayed by this kind of apathy and silence on part of these regimes.
And let's also take that question to Mr. Dawson in Osaka. We were focusing on the lack of response, not just a unified response, but any response from the Arab world with regards to events that we're seeing right now.
Well, with regards to Egypt, they've been traditionally paid off. That's even before when Mubarak was in charge. They always were the second largest aid recipient from the United States, paid to look the other way, paid to close the border crossing. Even when they're facing no electricity in Gaza, they'd shut down the grids. So their palms are greased just as well. And so that's why it's up to the international community to see that, look, a lot of these neighboring regimes, you know, just being Arab, having the same ethnicity doesn't mean just automatically you're going to do the right and moral thing. They have a lot of political corruption and a lot of bribery and pressure from the United States mainly as well. And so that is why private organizations, universities, etc., internationally from Japan to America should be boycotting and divesting from Israel and putting economic pressure on the system, because you can do that without having to appeal to a state body. The U.S. should be removed from any negotiations. Abbas is, you know, he's the kind of opposition they want. He's paid off. He looks the other way. They're not representing the people. You can't look to government to solve your problems. People have to solve their own problems, and there are a lot of methods other than appealing to authority that's just going to be plutocratically bought off the way it is in the West Bank, as well as even in the United States. A lot of Americans didn't want to move the embassy either. If you do polls of young Jews in America too, they're against these Israeli policies as well. But they're done against the will of the people because we're not represented, despite saying we have representative government. Money is represented, but we can boycott and divest. Churches can do it, universities can do it, and that does have an impact. It had an impact on South Africa. That's what got the ball rolling. Before the states got behind it, there was a populist movement. And that's something when people see these sickening pictures of young men and women being shot through the knees and the eyeballs, shot in the groin, or straight up shot through the face and killed. And they see this, what are they throwing stones at people with machine guns? This is Manifest Destiny 2.0, except it's in 2018, not 200 years ago. And it's utterly disgusting. And the world's not going to stomach this. It won't be on U.S. media, three-letter networks, and that is going to discredit them. We all know it's not going to be on CNN, ABC, Fox, etc. They never cover it when people from Gaza are murdered by snipers. Never. It won't be in the major papers in the United States, but it's going to be all over the online media, and it will be all over the international media. And there are a lot more people that live outside the U.S. than inside the U.S. And there are a lot of people in the U.S. that get online and get news as well. And they need to boycott and divest. That's the answer.
Mr. Ahilu, our guest in Osaka, Mr. Dawson believes that it's appalling the Western media does not in any form cover the violence that the Israelis carry out against the Palestinians on a day-to-day basis. What are your thoughts on that?
It's sad. Palestinians say that the Western media outlets are biased when it comes to the coverage of their narrative. This has been obvious for the past years, even during the major wars that Israel launched in 2008, 2012, 2014, and nowadays. It seems that Gaza is no longer a priority to the international community. The U.S. administration given Israel a green light to deal with Gaza, to crush the resistance, to shut the Palestinians' voices, to do whatever it likes. So that's why we see there is a growing anger amongst Palestinians who take to the social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, whatever other available means in order to make their voices heard worldwide. We see that they are being followed by some supporters across the world. We see that the videos emerging from the ground, civilians and armed people gunned down like sitting ducks by Israeli occupation forces are spread all over the world thanks to these citizen journalists on the ground. And it's embarrassing that what some of the media outlets claim to be transparent and neutral, credible, objective, they ignore the human suffering. It's not about shots or rockets fired from Gaza to Israel. It's about a human story that has been neglected for the past 70 years, 7 decades of expulsion, dispossession. People have been living in miserable conditions at refugee camps across the Arab world, across the world, in miserable conditions. And these people have only got one demand: to return to their ancestors' homes and towns. So at the end of the day, the Palestinians are not going to vanish like Native Americans. This is what all Palestinians say. They are there to stay. Israel was hoping that the Palestinian refugees or Palestinians in general would forget about this sacred right, the right of return. But Palestinians, 70 years on, they say loud and clear that we will never relinquish our right of return.
Mr. Ahilu, do you think the Trump administration underestimated how sensitive and emotional the issue of Al-Quds is for Palestinians?
The U.S. administration has been always in support of Israel. So Trump or anyone in the White House has no regard to the Palestinian suffering or story. It knows that Palestinians would rise up and stage demonstrations, even in some Arab countries worldwide. But they were hoping that by the time the embassy is relocated to Jerusalem, these demonstrations will come to an end. It's not about it underestimated the response. The U.S., it does what it wants. It's a superpower, and it knows that Arab regimes are in its pocket. It knows that Israel is a powerful force on the ground, planted in the Arab world. And at the end of the day, the U.S. is one of the 5 permanent members at the U.S. Security Council. So many UN resolutions were vetoed by the U.S. And if the Palestinians, even Abbas himself, he chose to boycott the peace talks. He's being pressured by the US administration to resume the peace talks. He decided to cut ties with the U.S. administration. The U.S. retaliated by refusing to renew the license of the PLO office in Washington. So we are seeing reprisal steps taken on part of the U.S. administration, even against Abbas himself, who was being described a very moderate, who made many concessions in favor of Israel. These protests, at least it's symbolic. It sends a message to the outside world that the Palestinians, they have a just cause. They are fighting for a just cause. Let the whole world decide and bring an end to this tragedy, to this agony of the Palestinians, especially those in Gaza who lack even healthy drinking water, daily power cuts for up to deserve to have a decent life.
Thank you very much, journalist and political commentator, Mr. Yusuf Al-Hailu, joining us from London. We're now going to cross over to our correspondent, Halal Safadi in